from Middle America. And I think it's quite stunning that the ship be an area as big as that unexplored. And that's beyond the pole on the other side of the slope from Middle America. And I think it's quite stunning that the ship be an area as big as that unexplored.
So, how are you?
I'm good. I have so many questions for you, and I'm sure that you want to talk to me as well.
You know what? Hit me with whatever you got. I mean, we'll bounce back and forth a little bit anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Did you want me to record this or not? For your sake? I mean, do you want the notes for later? Because I mean, sometimes because I talk to people like you quite often, and people like scribbling notes. I was going, we can record.
No,
this.
that would be. Well, sorry, I just broke my pen. That would be great.
Okay. Done.
Awesome. Yeah, I am. My only concern about being on the podcast.
Oh no, I won't publish it if you don't want.
Oh yeah, no. Well, I was just telling you, like, I actually am. I am in complete agreement that there needs to be more dialogue between different groups of people who do different things. And one of the things I felt so bad about when we were doing our interviews was people saying that when they wanted to ask scientists questions, that they felt like they were sort of like angry or closed off, or they wouldn't respond. So I'm all about that. However, what I don't like is angry emails. I don't have the constitution for it. And I've been getting some of those already. And I just know that, like, the more active publicity or, me being on your show, I just want to kind of avoid some of that.
Oh, this isn't a show, by the way. This is just you and I talking.
Oh, no, this is. I meant like putting it or being on a podcast or.
Oh, gotcha. I mean, I'm just recording the audio part, the video part. We're not doing anything.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I get you. Look, it takes a thick skin. It really does. And it's weird because you're on the other side of the fence. I mean, obviously you're not with us. And so the other side of the fence doesn't get that much hate, but ever since that Netflix thing happened, it just went crazy. I had what you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, no, of course.
No.
Yeah, no, I actually met the producer and director.
Oh, you talked to him?
Yeah, no, yeah, I met them at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, and I've seen the movie at least 3 times now.
They were at the film festival in Chicago?
No. It was just so the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago had a film series.
Yeah.
And
yeah. I'm sorry. And Behind the Curve played there. You're absolutely right. In fact,
exactly.
it was one of the last showings before it went into distribution.
Yeah. Right. And again, like, one of the big things that we were both saying, both the director and producer who were there and me, and that the museum completely supported, is it's unfair to say that these people are crazy or stupid.
Right.
So that was like a big part of what we were talking about, and trying to push that back.
Right.
So, but I'm getting, like, I think in part so I presented research that was talking mostly about, so we tested some of Eric Dubé's arguments, the 200 proofs the Earth is not a spinning ball.
Sure.
Just as examples of different types of arguments. So there's like religious argument, right? And then there were some of like the experiments that were talked about. And then there were the sort of like conspiracy-based experiments talking about like NASA editing photos.
Right.
And so we wanted to see how those differed, how people rated those arguments, right? What they found was most effective. But one of the things that I had mentioned too was that when we were interviewing people, that almost everybody had found this through YouTube, and that it really is a YouTube-based community.
Oh yeah.
And that got turned into, researcher blames YouTube for propagation of flowers. And then I started getting emails from people who, like, one of them was actually kind of funny. They said that they nominated me for Minister of Truth, from like 1984. But I wasn't even saying that stuff should be censored or anything. I was just saying that, if we have, people looking for science on YouTube,
Right.
then scientists should take advantage and communicate with people where the people are looking.
Right.
Um,
There were two sides. It was interesting when I saw that story start to blossom because it's weird. The media has gotten to the stage now where they don't even have to give credit necessarily to the original article. They just say, "Oh yeah, some such and such down there, they said blah blah blah," and everybody just rips off each other. And it could have been taken two ways. One was, okay, were you calling? And I know where you're coming from. Or were you calling? It's like, look, you want to point the blame at somebody, blame it on YouTube, and the other people were like looking at like, why is this a story? It's the most obvious thing in the world, of course. To us, it's like, of course it's on YouTube because there are no other YouTube is the largest television network in the world now.
Yeah.
And thousands of lifetimes worth of content. So it's like, of course, what else would it be? Kind of like if you want to buy weird stuff, odds and ends, you go to eBay. You want to do a search. Google is now a verb.
Yeah, I know.
So there's certain things, benchmarks that are in there. You want to send money to people, PayPal. It's you want to look up movie reviews, Rotten Tomatoes, and so on and so on. So no, I knew when the story came out, but it was interesting that you kind of caught some pushback. But
yeah,
but at the same time, it was weird because when it came out, and I know you have questions, which is Congress. They met that special session when Google met with the United States government last year to talk about the problem of potentially quote unquote fake news. And out of all the topics they brought up flat Earth, which was interesting. Right. It's like, wow, really? Out of all the things you're going to bring up us? Sorry, go ahead.
To be fair, one thing that I'll say is the reason why they use flat Earth as an example.
Yeah.
Because when you look at Congress and what they're polarized on, some of the things that they'll fight about, they will actually disagree amongst themselves in Congress.
Right.
So they can't talk about like climate change or vaccines or I understand that within the flat Earth community, there's a lot of pushback on some of those topics as well.
Right.
But I think that flat Earth is the one that right now is a small enough community that it is not in Congress. So they can sort of use that as a example of something that they all agree on.
You're absolutely right. And that's a good point. Yeah, we have no reps anywhere. Yeah, there's nothing. Yeah, you can't. It was funny because in the flat Earth community, in fact, there was somebody that was pitching a television show recently. And they were saying, oh, should it be an all-inclusive conspiracy show? I go, no, because there's some conspiracies you can't talk about now. You can't. Look what happened to Robert De Niro when he tried to release a vaccination movie at his film festival. No, 9/11 is still touchy 20 years later. People don't want to talk about it and so on and so on. Anyway, sorry. Questions. What do you have?
Oh yeah. Well, so the first thing I wanted to do, and this is what I do too when I'm talking to reporters, because I don't want them to take me out of context, is I want to define conspiracy theory. So when I say conspiracy theory, I'm not using it in a dismissive sense.
Right.
I'm using it as an explanation that involves a group of people who are hiding something for some reason, right? So in the flat Earth community, the way that I've heard flat Earth described is that like NASA, for example, is either covering information up or they're editing photos or they're hiding it in a way. So to me, that's why I would call flat Earth a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. The clinical definition of conspiracies, I think it's three people or more from a legal sense. I can tell you because I have been convicted of conspiracy years ago because I ran an illegal fireworks thing out of my university. Whole other story for another time. Very, very interesting. But because I had three or more people involved, we conspired together.
Interesting.
To do this thing. So that's this whole separate charge. Like you get the actual crime, whatever it is, and then if you have other people involved, they can tack on conspiracy to it because you were working as a group.
Right. So when I say that again, I just mean people who are working together as a group. No. And like I said, so I see flat Earth as a conspiracy theory in the sense that much of the explanation is that there are people who are hiding information or that they don't want you to know.
Sure.
Right. Okay, so some of the people that we talked to a large majority of the people who we talked to at the conference were biblical literalists.
Right.
So they believe.
Oh, you were at Denver.
Both.
You were at Denver and
Raleigh. So I had research.
You were at Raleigh? Did we talk?
No,
Oh,
no, no. My research. So I have research assistants who are there
oh, okay, okay,
doing this now. So I mean, they talk to Robbie. I talked to Robbie on the phone
got it, got it, got
times. Um, now, so I don't think I've heard you say that you are a biblical literalist. Are you?
it. Wow, that's a tough call. Literalist, kind of. But I know people say, "Well, you're either you are or you aren't." And it's like, okay,
Oh,
well,
no, I mean,
I'm not going to believe everything. I don't take it all literal, but there are a lot of things that are very literal to me.
okay. So,
But
so you,
I'm not as
I,
hardcore as others. Let's put it that way.
right. And so I know when we've asked people, would you consider yourselves religious? They say no, because for them, they equate that term with sort of subscribing to dogma that comes from
Yeah.
like authority in the church. But when I say it, I just mean like, do you have some sort of faith-based view? So like, whether like you're Christian
Oh yeah,
or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but you would consider yourself religious in
Oh,
that sense?
absolutely. I was raised a strong born again Christian. Church was not just a Sunday thing. We had youth group and vacation Bible school, and I went to Camp Malibu, and so on and so on. And then, it was very, very active. And then I went to university. And by the way, I say university instead of college because outside of the United States, if you didn't already know that,
Yeah.
that whole thing. I learned
Yeah.
that when I lived up in Canada. It's like you can't say college. It's like, really?
Yeah, I heard you say that, and so I was wondering if you had lived in Canada.
I did. I lived in Victoria
Ah,
for a year, and
mhm,
that you learn pretty quick. It's like
not
you don't
yeah,
say college is technical college, which is
it's something different.
interesting. America screws up so many little things like that. For us, college and university is literally the same term. So
You,
anyway, when I left the island and I went to university for the first time, that's when I realized, like, oh, there's other views, there's other things happening out there. Christianity isn't the only religion in the world.
mhm,
And then I fell away from it, and then Flat Earth snapped me back into a form of Christianity, but it was different than what it was before. Meaning now
okay.
I respect the four major religious houses outside of Christianity, but at the same time, everybody I think, well, I mean, full well. I mean, you've done the stats. For me, and maybe you know some of the numbers more than I do. At least half of the community, at least in the United States, are strong Christian. I mean, the
Yeah.
conferences and the meetups I have gone to, look, they're quoting chapter and verse.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Well, and so one of the things that I was curious about with regard to that is, so one of the things that I studied when I went to university. So as an undergrad, I studied philosophy, and then I did some biology and psychology and communication.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we talked about was epistemology, right? And so that's how we know something, right? So what types of evidence are convincing to us?
Right.
And we talk about the different versions of this. We talk about testimony, right? So believing something from other people, firsthand evidence, right? When you've experienced it yourself,
Sure.
and then logic and reasoning when you can deduct or induct something, right, from evidence.
Right.
What it seems to me when I've spoken with people, when we talk to people from the flat Earth community, is that there's a lot of distrust in testimony because there's a recognition that anybody who's telling you haven't seen it firsthand, right? So if my mom tells me that she saw like a pink bird yesterday, I might like go, I mean, did you really see it? Like,
Right.
there's no way you can prove to me. But one of the things that I think are interesting about the Bible, and this may apply less to you depending on, because you said
Oh,
like you
no,
say,
no. I can hold my own. No worries.
but yeah, but one of the questions is, if a lot of these institutions and authorities could be corrupted, might be corrupted, are corrupted.
Right.
What about the publishing companies that release biblical texts? And so how do we know that the Bible hasn't been corrupted
Oh,
in similar ways?
are you kidding? That's an excellent point. And that is something that's been covered, for years and years. Critics of the Bible have talked about that for a long time, which is, look, the Bible was technically written, published. Good point. You said that, published by man, from the Roman era. I mean, come on,
From different people too, right? So you have all sorts of different versions of it. You have the King James version, and
right.
so I mean, if men are involved at all, so even let's assume that there was a God sanctioned text
Right.
that could be produced. We clearly know that man can interfere and
Yep.
make information disinformation.
Absolutely right.
So why do you think, in your view, does the flat Earth community, and in particular, because we know that there's a strong population of religious or biblical literalists in that group,
Right.
is the Bible trustworthy? Like, what
Most
makes
you are correct. It is a leap of faith more than anything. The reason why the flat Earth community has jumped on it, and it's really amazing because it's not just Catholics versus Protestants, or
Right.
or Christianity versus Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, or Islam, because 3 of those 5 share common stories, which is a whole nother thing. It's because out of all the stories from all the texts, there's only one verse in the entire Bible that even hints at the globe. That's where it gets interesting. It's like, it doesn't matter. Yeah, men publish the Bible, of course. And you can say, well, did men corrupt the Bible? And then you get into like, well, no, God wouldn't let them. I won't even get into that. But and I don't know if they quote you the chapter and verse, but it's Isaiah 40:22. He who sitteth upon the circle of the earth. And the religious scholars are quick to point out, it's like, look, circle is not globe, it's not ball, it's not sphere. It's a completely different word in Hebrew. So that's the only verse. Everything else says the same thing in different fashions. Everything from Genesis and the firmament to the earth is fixed and immovable, versus stuff I talked about in the clues, which I didn't even talk about the story of Joshua, which says, he asked God to hold the sun and the moon in the sky for an extra day so he could kill more people. And God just said, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that. And he did. Or of course, my favorite, which was the Tower of Babel, which is supposedly the bridge to heaven. Where's that going on a spinning ball that's going in 5 different directions? If it's this flat stationary earth with some sort of dome structure, well, it's going to the roof, plain and simple. You compile all those together, and there's some great websites out there. My favorite is testingtheglobe.com by Rob Skiba, who you probably heard of. And everybody says the book is a flat earth Bible, at least the Christian side. Doesn't matter if it's the Catholic version or the Protestant version or anything else. And since the first 5 books of the Bible were basically ripped from the Torah, Genesis through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I can never pronounce that word. Where am I getting at is the reason why. Sorry, short version. The leap of faith is because there's nothing to contradict it. Doesn't matter if man published the book or not. It seems to be that no matter what they published, whoever published it, there's lots of flat Earth references in it. And if there's only one against, and again, if it wasn't for that one, it would get way worse than what you're seeing right now. I mean, there are pastors out there which are using that Isaiah verse as veto power against the rest of the Bible. I mean, it's like, no, this verse contradicts everything else. It's like, really, Isaiah? That's Genesis over there. Sorry.
That only works too if you take a literal interpretation of the Bible.
Right.
Right.
Well,
So-
which a lot do. And
Right.
come on, so what happened was the flat Earth. This may help you a little bit. The flat Earth reinforced the Christian, well, all religions, but we'll only pick on Christians. The Christian belief. So if they were 90% sure that that the Bible is that God is real, something built us, flat Earth takes them to like 97 or 98%. It's like, well, it doesn't seem like that much. Well, it is though. I mean, it takes it to the point where now even there's like there are feuds now within the Christian community in flat Earth, saying you have to follow this book and this. They're actually drawing lines in the sand now, saying, okay, we've already proven this how far it's gotten. Where it's like, we've already proven that the world has been created, God exists, therefore these texts have to be followed. I mean, it's literally, you watched the movie several times. That Monty Python reference was no joke, and I didn't ask them to put it in. I'm glad they did though, because it really it's like, that's how much conviction now has been added. It's almost like flat Earth added jet fuel to all the major houses of religion. And so does that kind of help?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. So the other thing that I wanted to ask about is sort of the trustworthiness of science.
Right.
So, I mean, when I was at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, one of the first questions that I asked the audience was, how many of you completely trust the government, right? How many of you completely trust pharmaceutical companies?
Right.
How many of you completely trust corporate? And I mean, clearly there are situations in which people don't trust these, because they view too that there are going to be situations in which profit or power are overtaking.
Right.
But there are, I mean, there are a lot. I mean, I'm not, I don't know if you'll believe me, but I can tell you I'm an independent scientist. I mean, I work for a university in the South, in the middle of the Bible Belt.
Sure.
I'm allowed to kind of study what I want to study. And, how do well, I guess this is sort of two questions. One is that, I think anybody who lives in our society or our world uses some science, and we trust some things,
Right.
but we're not trusting others. And sort of what, in your view, can scientists do to help increase their own trustworthiness? Assuming that they're trying to honestly, answer questions and put their information out there where people can understand it.
Boy, that's a tough one. And it's not the first time it's been asked to me. And I've been trying to think of different ways to answer this because, as you know, science, look, the problem isn't just science. It's everybody else around science. So, of course, we all know that there's lies everywhere. People lie for their own benefit. And it's mostly because of our competitive nature as human beings. I mean, just take the first four off the top of your head. Business, politics, sports, entertainment. People lie. I could spend all day on sports and some on entertainment. Politics isn't even worth talking about because, I mean, look up, politicians, like crooked politicians, like the first thing that comes up. But with science, for a long time, they were integrity, right? But, and you've probably heard this term before, and that is they ended up, though, like anybody else, they took leaps of faith when they realized that people will just believe whatever science rubber stamps. And the great line by Neil Tyson, which is one of the most arrogant things I've ever heard outside of Kanye, which is science is right whether or not you believe in it. And it's like, okay, if you're telling me what and you've heard me probably say this before, which is, you want to tell me what the boiling temperature of water is at sea level? Sorry, my ride's here. The boiling temperature of water at sea level, that's fine. I can test that right now. You want to tell me what the core of the Earth looks like? No, not a chance. And in fact, back in the day, they used to even put in small print below that big cross section of the Earth, showing all the colorful bands leading to the white center. Basically, we have no idea what's going on down there. But then at some point, they removed that text. And now it's like, okay, you show that to a 9-year-old, and then, he graduates. What do you think? It's like, oh, yeah, that's what the core of the Earth looks like. The deepest hole ever drilled is 8 miles. So
can I pause here for a second? So this is one part of that. So back to that sort of like epistemology question.
Yeah.
People reason about what's in the center of the Earth.
Sure, of course.
Right. And so based on things like volcanoes, right? So when you have lava come up through volcanoes,
sure,
they believe that there's sort of a hot molten surface. And so are you just saying that it's the certainty?
Science never does. And I get it. I totally get it because, people look to them. People have been looking to versions of scientists throughout the ages. It's like, tell us, wise man, why this is this, and they just like, well, I speculate, blah, blah, blah. But if you say that long enough, eventually you just pull out the word speculate. And then you say, it's this, all right? Find me a science book where you see a giant question mark in the middle of something, like the core of the Earth. That's what it should be. The core of the Earth should be a big question mark, and it's not.
I mean, taught, for example, to use very mitigating language, because when we do research, some things are conditional under certain circumstances. Right. I mean, particularly when you're doing work about behavior, like I do, right? Human behavior. It's always conditional and contextual and dependent on a whole bunch of different sort of circumstances. Now, I'll agree that sometimes, well, first of all, whenever we try to talk to the general population about that, by using that sort of mitigating language, they think we're lying. But it's not that we're lying.
And it's kind of like the few apples ruin the whole bunch type thing. Of course, there's lots of great science. I'm sure you were a wonderful person, and I would never accuse you of being anything.
Oh no, not even, yeah.
Probably integrity I probably can't even gaze upon you directly, but at the same time.
Difference between like media covered science and then if you're like reading in academic journals, if we're being precise, sometimes that's perceived as being like trying to purposefully hide information with jargon, but often jargon's used just to be precise. But if we oversimplify, then we are lying, right? Because we're broadly generalizing something that's not true. So I think it's such a struggle in science comm.
Oh, absolutely, it is. I would say transparency would be the solution, but that's almost impossible because look, this is going to sound like a horrible statement, but scientists need Porsches too. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of scientists when they go into the private sector that take the money to manipulate data so that a product, look, shareholders are shareholders. That has not changed in a long, long time. And a scientist, they go to them and say, look, you've got to publish this because, you've got to make these results do this so our product can do this. And then bad things happen. Going all the way back to, oh my God, lead paint, lead gasoline, DDT, all the versions of DDT. I don't know, asbestos. And by the way, I love asbestos as a product. Asbestos is a fantastic thing. Does a lot of great things. Unless you work in the factory, then you're dead.
Right. And like smoking, the same thing.
Oh yeah, the smoking thing. Yeah.
Have you heard of the Open Science Framework?
No.
Okay, so Google this when you have a chance. See, that's me using it as a verb. OSF.io. And it's something that I think it's not currently happening in industry,
right,
but this is a big push in the sciences. It's called Open Science Framework. And the idea is to increase more openness and transparency
right,
in science, including pre-registering, kind of like what we're planning on doing, so we're not changing things after the fact.
Right.
So I think that I would hope that that sort of thing too can help increase trustworthiness of science.
Potentially, sure, no question. Here's why science gets linked up with the flat Earth, because let's cut to the chase here. Science, the reason why science gets hammered so badly with flat Earth is because the issues that we're talking about with are geologic and astrophysic and the other things. And
Motion.
So by
Gravity.
default, you've got your scientists tied to it. Now, again, we're not talking about giant conspiracy. People will say, well, are all scientists lying? This huge cover-up with millions of people, every space agency, every scientist, every astronomer. It's like, no. It's so big that 99% of the people don't know anything because they wouldn't. All the wrench turners at NASA, 90 people that build fuel systems and polish capsules and all this, they don't know anything. I live next to the garage mechanic at NASA, not exaggerating here. His name was Wayne Ottinger. Knew all the Apollo and Mercury and Gemini guys on a first name basis. His walls were just bristling with plaques from NASA. He knew nothing about nothing because he just turned a wrench. He built the frickin' things. He built the LEM and all that. So why would you have to tell him? You wouldn't.
Right.
Science gets bashed because you got to bash somebody. In this case, somebody. If it's a conspiracy, then somebody is lying. All right, who do you go after? NASA would be the first thing. And since NASA, I'm not going to say NASA is the poster child for science. It's not. But they paint themselves as that because they want to make themselves, even though they are fully military. Everybody in there is.
Space program sort of popularized science in a way.
Exactly, it did absolutely. Between it was a great cumulative effort where you had National Geographic, and NASA and all the other science, popular science. They all went together into this, and once the whole moon mission was proposed and did that in the 60s and 70s, that was like the peak of science. Even though, which is weird because you'd think that other things in science would be the better thing to humanity.
Or like the science fiction in the sense that people have always thought about like walking on the moon or floating, and so I think it's one of those exciting things that seems really far-fetched.
Yeah, and it catches the public eye. Look, the public. Here's the other thing that why science is catching such hell compared to us is. Sorry, real quick, and I know you got a lot of questions. Which is, people, and I've just heard this so many times over the years. People don't want to learn; they want to be entertained. So if science has something entertaining, people will watch it. And the only thing in science that's really entertaining has something to do with the space program. And even that's been losing its luster for a long time because there's no people involved. Sorry, go ahead.
No, the bad psychology findings too, that they get tons of media play because it's like weird or crazy.
Yeah.
So
people
I
don't want to know about a vaccine. Well, I mean, about different biological things. I mean, look at all your other geology, hydrology, biology. Nobody cares about that stuff. And and now because the media spectrum has gotten so broad, you try to. In fact, somebody asked me recently. They said, "How could you may ask this eventually? What could science do to make a better push into the general public?" And I said, well. The problem is that, back in the day when there were only 3 television stations, you could do something like Schoolhouse Rock and trick kids into learning, right? And even the parents that would be like listening over their shoulder. But that was then. Nowadays, I don't even know how many hundreds of television channels, let alone internet stuff. I mean, there's literally thousands of lifetimes worth of media out there. You could spend $10 billion and create your own version of Schoolhouse Rock and push it out to everything from Netflix to YouTube to every television station. But but then you would have people analyzing that, and people, well, why, it would come off as desperate. And so anyway, so go ahead. Question.
No problem. So one of the things that you said in the documentary, and that we heard from other flat earthers as well, is that they said that science can't debunk it. Right. And that when you guys tried to start, many of you said that you saw the recommendations or you heard about it and you went through a process of trying to debunk it.
Right.
Well, I was really curious, sort of to hear about that process. Like, where are you looking for information? What sort of things were you questioning?
Everybody, and thank you for asking that, because it was touched on in the movie, but Daniel didn't want to turn it into a nuts and bolts movie, which would have taken it too long anyway. I appreciate that he was trying to go to the human interest piece. And just so you know, because we've only been talking about this recently in the community, because he let it slip in the iTunes director's commentary, was that the reason why he tweaked it against us was because of that single thing. And I don't know if you saw, or no, you had research assistants in Raleigh, I think, which was when that 12-year-old kid walked up to the microphone. And I have heard this now. I even heard it on an interview I did last night where hardcore science people are like, yeah, that bothered me. And it's like, well, look, we're not recruiting. It's not like we're Big Tobacco with Joe Camel. We have no special program for the kids. Look, he came up. I mean, I'm talking to, after I'm done with you, by the way, we have like an hour and a half left. Before, I don't know how long you want to, because then I have a high school literally right after you. And then I have a high school tomorrow and a high school. There's some high school in Chicago wants to fly me out. Daniel would probably just cringe if he heard any of this stuff. Anyway.
So can I ask you real quick, brief tangent? So the ones that are flying you out, these are people who want you to explain your views to the students because they subscribe to them, or is it
some of the kids subscribe to them and some of the kids just find it interesting? So they. Yeah, look, the U.gov survey, which I'm sure you've heard about by now.
Yeah, YouGov.
Yeah, the YouGov survey, when they were talking about the 18 to 24-year-olds, how, a third of them were like not really buying the globe anymore. No, that wasn't the part that got me. The part that got me, which was left completely out of the survey, and nobody even talked about in the articles, was the 12 to 17s. The 12 to 17s are worse.
We can't
legally talk to them.
Right, without parental consent.
Exactly. And so I kind of joked about, well, I wasn't joking. I kind of poking at one of the troll channels out there. And I said, because they were saying, stay away from the children. I go, I'm sorry, it's too late. we already have them. But that's a whole other thing for another time. Okay, so to your point about people that go into, because I hated flat Earth. Everybody starts in the negative, which should show you how strong this thing is, which is nobody goes into it loving it. Everybody hates it. It took me 9 months. I looked at the recommendation. I said, this is the stupidest thing ever. And I had literally a visceral response when I first clicked on it. I was like, in fact, I was shocked. It was like, why am I getting embarrassed about clicking on a flat Earth? Literally flushed. And it's going, I've clicked on some weird stuff on the internet. Everybody has, and there's never bothered me. This thing bothers me. And then when you try to debunk it, you go to the obvious things first. Everybody does the same thing. It's a knee-jerk reaction. You go to space. You look up of images of the Earth from space. You go into the space programs. You start looking at stuff, and you start comparing what other flat earthers are saying, and you're staring at the images, and then you start, images of satellites from space, and then start dabbling in physics. My God, I've learned so many silly scientific factoids in the last 5 years, more than I ever retained in university. And the more you do, and you think you can, because we have kind of like a shotgun pattern approach to flat Earth. There's all these different facets, right? You may be able to knock down a few, or heck, if you're confident or overconfident, you think you knock down quite a few, but there's still some that get through, and those keep nagging at you. And the more you try to hammer them down, it just gets worse and worse and worse, to where finally, out of frustration, the usual turnaround time now is about 2 weeks. That's usually the incubation period. Sorry, go ahead.
When you were debunking, which ones were you able to sort of knock down, and which ones pushed through for you?
The ones that, and again, knocked down it probably isn't even the best word. It was just that it was
Right.
like
Well,
I was satisfied enough that it was probably a globe with these aspects, but there were too many. But for those little handful, there were way too many more that got through. So, like for
right.
example, the ones that I didn't like, and I still don't like because we don't know. You know, we're still trying to work it out. Would be like the Antarctic sun. You know, the 24-hour sunlight.
Yeah.
That's got to be one of the biggest. What exactly is the ISS? Even though that could very well be a military operation. How the sun and the moon work exactly?
Yeah.
Because we're talking about a blend now of projections and software. And I was in the
Mhm.
software industry for a lot of years. And once you get into software development, and regardless if you play games or not, or go into simulations or not, and I was into the whole simulation thing since its infancy, I know what's possible. We can do a lot when it comes to that. So then all of a sudden, again, you start going, because there's no concrete blocks to stand on. It's like you're jumping around a lot of different things, and it starts to blur together.
Mhm.
So fine, the Antarctic sun, how the sun and the moon work. Yeah, I may have problems with those, but there's too many other questions like gravity versus the vacuum of space, and everything that NASA's done. Again, because you're leaning on the space agency, that's the part that falls apart. That's the thing
Right.
that falls apart first, which is Apollo. Everybody starts with, okay, we went to the moon. Obviously, if we went to the moon, it's a globe. And then you start looking at the moon stuff. And by the way, a lot of this wasn't because of what we did, it was because of all the years. People have been doubting the freaking moon missions since the moon
Oh
missions.
yeah. No.
I
Yeah.
mean, all the way
I,
back in the 70s, people were doubting those. But
yeah.
before the internet, what are you going to do? You're going to go to little conventions and the UFO. It's usually just a booth at a UFO convention. Nobody really, paid it much attention. And then once the internet came out, people started sharing notes. And the moon mission had been torn down for so long. So all of a sudden, you have a bunch of flat earthers that are referencing anti-moon stuff that had been
Mhm.
built up for 20 years. And that, once you go there, that's a huge jumping off point. It's like, heck, I've had people that were into conspiracies that said, that don't believe in flat earth. They said, fine, Apollo is a piece of trash, never happened. But you can't tell me the ISS is fake. And I thought, wow, that's some weird logic. Going, you realize that if they fake one thing, you fake it all. That's crime 101, which is because the penalty is the same. It's. I'll use a movie reference. Like, look, if you're gonna shoot one guy, you might as well shoot them all. Because if you get caught, you're gonna get life anyway. So why would you make anything real if the one part of it's fake? It's just what you do. And then after that, it just snowballs. After that, you start looking into long distance photography. And after that, you start looking into little things in physics, like, again, gravity versus the vacuum of space.
Yeah. Ask you about that real quick.
What?
So one of the things. So we did ask people about what their concepts of gravity was,
Oh, yeah,
and
it's
I would.
all over the place.
Yeah, and I would love to ask you about yours.
Mm.
So can you tell me a little bit about the gravity versus the vacuum of space thing? What is gravity to
Okay,
you? What is
gravity is the scientific explanation. Again, I'm going to pick on Neil Tyson real quick. So Neil Tyson, he said that we can't tell you what gravity is. We can only tell you what it does. We can only tell you the symptoms of gravity, and all scientists will tell you this because they can't replicate it. It's not like now if we could generate a unified field, then yeah, maybe we could do some sort of gravity thing. But gravity is just some molecular magnet that pulls things down. And if you're a globalist, well, it pulls it down to the center of a globe. And if you're flat, or at least me, it just pulls it straight down. Period. That's all there is. Now, there are some people in flat Earth that'll say, well, it's buoyancy. Because yes, you can get the same sort of effect with buoyancy. We all know this with water. For example, you take a beach ball and you put it underwater and you let it go. It's going to pop up to the surface. Why? Well, because of buoyancy. But buoyancy only goes so far. And you can't use buoyancy as the absolute end all, especially in a pressurized system like this, because if you're in a closed container, like an airplane, and you're going straight up in a pull up on a plane, well, you're in a sealed capsule, so it's not buoyancy that's pushing you back into your seat. It's something else. It's some sort of molecular magnetic force, which is known as gravity. Could it be a combination of the two? Sure. But gravity, in my opinion, does gravity exist? Yes. Could it be a mixture of both? Yes, because if it's a pressurized system, then both play on each other. Sure, why not? And by the way, that's the other thing. The argument, gravity versus the vacuum of space, which is law of thermodynamics, which is pressure. pressure needs a container. You know what I mean? You can't have an atmosphere without some sort of container, be it soft or it hard or whatever. We see that, you know, from a can of spray paint to a balloon to whatever else you can come up with, right? You know, pressure needs a container. What's the container on Earth? Exactly. In fact, there's only two things I've ever seen that defy that law of thermodynamics. One, of course, is the Earth, because, well, if it's not a container, where's the bleeding edge? Cut to the chase. Where's the bleeding edge of our atmosphere to the vacuum of space? And I have talked to vacuum experts that absolutely say, and you can watch videos on this on YouTube, which the power of a vacuum versus non-vacuum is violent. It's extreme. It's instant. There is no middle ground. There is no bleeding edge, right? That does not happen. And so we're talking about a little tiny ball, a little rock with a wispy smoke around it in a vast, vast room entirely made out of vacuum. How does that smoke stay on there? How does that little atmosphere stay on there? The other thing, real quick, which is the other thing is the spacesuit, which is, again, defies. And look up the part that bugged me a whole bunch was the spacesuit had the early versions of the spacesuit of NASA. When you look at them, the videos are fascinating. That when they were building them, the early versions were plastic and metal and boxy because pressure needs a container, right? And all of a sudden they realized, like, yeah, we're never going to be able to get into a capsule with these damn things. They could barely even walk. You know, they were basically robot suits, you know, big, clunky, freaking robot suits. And then somebody came up with genius. Freaking, I don't know who this guy was. I hope he's lived and died well, which is, let's just do a soft suit, film it. Nobody knows anything about physics anyway. It'll work. It'll totally work. And it did. It was perfect. I mean, everyone was like, oh, all you had to do is shoot it. And it's like, oh, yeah, look, people are bending articulation points. Their fingers could move, playing golf, hooking up electronics. Well, it was on television. It's absolutely real. As that was brilliant. I mean, kidding? The law of thermodynamics says that it would have been they would have turned into parade floats. They would have been completely stiff. You ever see that movie, Christmas Story?
Yeah.
Okay. Remember the kid when he was put up in those winter coats? It's like, I can't put my arms down. That would have been exactly what would have happened. I mean, they would have been stiff as a board because the suit would have been fighting him the entire time. Can I put you on mute for 1 second? Okay. Anyway, so that kind of how, it's a long version of how I got to it, but everybody goes down that same sort of road. And there's like, they'll pick on space, they'll pick on physics, they'll pick on.
So it's mostly then, so one thing that I just want to clarify a bit. So you talked a little bit about the points that you were looking into.
Right.
Were you mostly looking at this just all over the web, or on YouTube specifically? Or
No. Anywhere I could. In fact, when I was looking, though, it was different than most people. I mean, most people now, the turnaround time is about 2 weeks. When I was looking, there wasn't that much out there, even though we're only talking about 4 years ago. And so, in fact, I even joined one of the Flat Earth societies just out of desperation. It's like, oh, maybe these guys know what's happening. And then I realized, oh, these guys are terrible. They're not doing it. I mean, they're the old guard, which it's stunning to me even now. They don't reach out to us, and I don't know who they are and what they do.
Yeah.
It blows my mind. It's like, really? You're just going to sit there? In fact, they called us. The first time I got contacted them was like 18 months after the clues were released. And it's like, oh yeah, support it, like what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. Where have you been? we're ripping it up out there. We are just, and I was as blunt as I could. As look, no offense, but we don't need you at this point. We're Flat Earth 2.0. Social media, we don't even need a website technically to do this. Anyway, what else you got?
No, so one thing more I want to say about gravity. So one of my dogs has allergies.
Yeah.
So when I learned about gravity, I didn't learn about it as a force that pulls down.
Right.
I took physics class, right? I learned it as that bodies have mass, and that mass is attracted to one another, right?
Right.
And so the location of bodies in space and atmosphere and other things are pulled in towards the center of mass, right?
Got it.
And so I guess I was wondering, do you see that as still consistent with the view that you're looking into, like the problems with gravity So not necessarily as a force pulling down, right? But as an attraction, right? Is
Yeah,
like
I mean,
that matters.
no, it doesn't change it at all.
Okay.
In fact, in something like this, if you use mass, it's like fine. Then the flat world has mass and then pulls it down. Although, if you want to go into a completely different thing, which is the whole simulation side, which I don't delve into very much because the average person, unfortunately, our civilization's never going to be able to understand that easily. There's nothing you can do.
We read about it a lot. Yeah,
it's too hard to explain to somebody. You have to know something about software, and you have to know something
well,
also.
I think the Matrix actually. So when I was in philosophy,
Yeah.
like the Matrix had come out just a year before,
Oh.
and it really sort of, guys, hush. Sorry, it really sort of changed the way people come here. It really sort of changed the way that people were able to envision, like what that means, right? So how
Did you ever see the movie that came out just before that called The 13th Floor?
I don't know, maybe not.
You really should look into that one if you get a chance. And and I've said this on several other things, but I'll tell you, which is there are three things that just scream simulation, and but they're all extremely complex to understand. One, of course, is the double slit experiment, which not the old version, but the new version with the single electron gun stuff. Quantum entanglement. I don't even want to get into that right now. And then, of course, the weird one, if you ever get a chance to look it up, would be neuroscience versus free will, which is a whole nother thing. It's like, what do you mean you can predict the outcome 8 seconds before? It's like, because then you're talking about predestination, which science says, oh, that doesn't exist. And it's like, then you're not even talking about a virtual world as much as you're talking about a virtual movie. And that would be, I hate to say it because, again, I've been in it long enough, that would be the most efficient way to go. Basically, what I'm saying is, short version for you, and again, we can go into other things, which is you plan out your path in advance. You play the game in advance, right? And then you just set up a memory block, and so that it never ever happened. And I'll give you like a real world version of this, which would be, let's say you're the director of a movie, right? You direct this fantastic movie, right? And you make it exactly the way you want. Forget about the producers and their notes. You direct it exactly the way you want, and then just before you watch it on screen, you erase the memory that you made it in the first place. You, as a director, will think it's the greatest thing ever because it absolutely clicks into it. It's like, wow, I would have done that. I would have done. This is the greatest movie ever. Because you and in fact, and you don't put the credits on, so you don't know who directed it. You would think it was the greatest thing ever, right? That's kind of what neuroscience and free will is kind of hinting at, which is, at least in my opinion, which is that everything, predestination, that would be the way to go. You combine that with a double slit experiment. But again, try to explain that to the average person on the street. You can't. I have to start with something really, really basic, which is, okay, you can't even just say it's a simulation. It's, if it's enclosed, forget about the simulation. If it's enclosed and flat, that's where you start.
Right.
So,
well, what do you think? So this is getting off topic a little bit.
Right.
What do you think about the difference between a rule-based world and predestination? Right. So is it technically predestination if you can predict the outcome because you know what the rules are? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Technically, all right. Well, isn't that kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other? I mean, if you've got to,
do you think it like is it?
It's kind of. Think, okay, wait. Okay, this will help. You remember in the Matrix, you watched the whole trilogy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You remember in the second one where Neo, and there was a lot of deep stuff in the Matrix they did not go into. I mean, people thought it was too cerebral by the time it got to the end. No. Whoever wrote that, and by the way, whoever wrote that, the rumor, it was not written by the Wachowski brothers. They bought it from whoever that woman was, and they just slapped their name on it because you can do that when you buy it. It's like, no, it was written by us because we wrote them a check. But when he was talking to the Oracle, one of the last times in that park, and he goes, "It's a question of choice," and he goes, "I can't make that choice." And she goes, "You didn't come here to make the choice. You already made it. You're here to understand why you made it."
Yeah.
And I thought that, and I didn't get that for a while. I mean, that's why I'm going, what does that mean? And then as I got more into, because software was still in its infancy back then.
Yeah.
And as I was going, oh yeah, a rule-based world, sure, right? You go a flow chart is what you're talking about here. A rule, it's like, okay, if this, then this, then this, then this, And it's like, well, of course, you know where it's going to go because you know the rules that are set out. What's the difference between at that point? Yeah, fine. You know what each path is going to lead to. And now my head's starting to hurt. But
No,
what's the difference between doing that and, again, no different than, we've seen this many, many times on YouTube. There are kids now that don't even play video games. They watch videos of kids playing video games. That's really what we're talking about here. And they get full enjoyment out of it. It's like, oh yeah, they don't even have to play them anymore. They just watch other. So what's the difference? Imagine the kid that recorded that game, then forgot he did it, had blow to the head, amnesia. He'd be like, yeah, wow, he's doing exactly what I. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling on.
No, I totally no. That was just sort of. I think even within the scientific community, we talk a lot about so in some ways there's still this religious influence within the scientific community that says people are different, right? People are different than the other rules that we have in this world. Right. And so if we could use our DNA and our brain chemicals, so our neuroscience, and if we could use all this stuff to technically predict our actions, then what makes it hard to determine, right? I mean, why isn't it not already technically predestination, or why is it not what makes it different? And I do believe that people are actually arguing about that. I don't think that that's settled. But one argument that says, here's what makes that different than like predestination is the interaction between those forces, right? So you only have free will until you interact with somebody else. But if all the decisions that you make are predictable based on, like, let's say your biology, for example, other people's things are predictable too, but when those two things interact, that's what changes the nature of the system.
Now you're getting into the Adjustment Bureau argument, which is
but I don't even think necessarily like but not the Adjustment Bureau specifically, but just the idea that that you can predict people's behavior, but where things get complicated is when they interact with other people.
Well, boy, now you're getting into game theory, which is, and I don't want to necessarily get into the spooky stuff. But yeah, okay, so you have free will, right? Which again is the argument to start. And then you run into another person with free will, which also, by the way, assumes that there may be things walking around us that don't have free will. Which in any, it's a whole nother thing, which any simulation and every software developer, it's like, look, you need an army of NPCs. Doesn't matter how many people are in it. You need an army of NPCs. No offense to the people that are out there, but look, nobody wants to be a dry cleaner for 30 years and sit there. They don't. There are some people that like dry cleaners are probably crying right now if they're listening to this. So, yeah, that's the big question. But to the defense on that is, again, if both paths were chosen in advance, basically you played it out, where, okay, our path, you and our path is going to cross and our interaction is going to spin off potential things. No, you just say, all right, when we hit this point, I go here, you go here, and then it deals from that. But yeah, I know what you're saying. And yeah,
I think it's interesting. Yeah. That's not even like something I have an opinion on. I just think it's interesting.
Oh no, it's very interesting. Very, very interesting.
Well, so one of the other things I wanted to ask you, and this is, I think, one of the last things. So if I wanted to be a flat earther, and I'm thinking, so I want to approach, or I want to look at this evidence. Now, a couple of the things that are used, or I've heard of as being evidence, I can't buy just because of my personal experience, right? Have you ever sent up a weather balloon?
Me personally?
Yeah.
No.
So
I mean, the community has, sure, but not me.
But you personally, right?
No.
Community aside. No. So I've sent up a weather balloon with the Atmospheric Sciences Department, and has seen the curvature of the Earth using that. Sure. And the other thing is now this is not me personally, but I've had multiple friends in science who have gone to Antarctica.
Sure.
So my friend Natasha just got back from Antarctica. She's a biologist and she studies ecosystems. Right. And so she spent, I think 3 months down in Antarctica. Yeah. And then my friend Michael actually is he works at a university in Pennsylvania. Yeah. And they do these tours where one of the faculty members go with, and they bring a bunch of like just regular people
Right.
will go on these tours, and they went to Antarctica, and so, and I mean, granted, like, any pictures that he sent me could have been fake or whatever, but like,
Oh, no, no, no. I believe he was there. I believe the
yeah,
images he was taking were real. Sure.
yeah, and it's from the images not an ice wall, and it's not all ice. There's dirt.
Right.
They didn't have 24-hour sun there. They had 18 hours right now. So
Yeah.
they got back February 8th.
Right.
But I mean, it just changes depending on the time of year. So I think, like, I wonder, so, well, some of the people say, well, you can't go to Antarctica if you're not a Freemason, but that's not
Oh my
technically true,
God.
right?
By the way, the rumor mill in the flat Earth community is rampant. I mean,
Yeah.
simple points get twisted to where now it's like, I mean, I've heard that. It's like, no, you go to Antarctica, you're dead. They'll shoot you dead right then and there. It's like, really?
They have cruises to Antarctica
Yeah,
that you
I
can
know.
go.
Yeah.
So, but my last question actually is about the rumor mill, because I wanted to ask you about, I was so struck by this, and I wish there was more information about it, about you being the subject of a conspiracy yourself.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit about that? What's that like?
Of course.
How does that make you feel?
Of course. No. And it's not bad. The one of the drawbacks of doing this is that you are, for lack of a better word, cultivating at least the core group, which is already extremely suspicious of everything.
Mm-hmm.
You combine that with a competitive nature, and that's how the whole thing started. Was, again, we're competitive about anything. Look, people will discredit other people in a blink of an eye. Everybody, I've seen this in YouTube many times, even though I don't consider myself a YouTube hardcore guy compared to other people. Once you see because people, they treat it like a score, right? My subs. All of a sudden you see somebody that's got 10,000 more subs than you. You squint and you're like, okay, what's this guy up to, right? And you're immediately suspicious of them. When it came to me, the whole thing started when it was back in 2015. Eric Dubay, of all people. God, Eric.
His movie get cut into short segments. That's why we use his. But,
the what?
Sorry, I said his video was just easy to cut into.
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah.
The only reason why we use
Eric,
it. Yeah.
what happened was people want to be, everybody wants to rule the world, and Eric and Matt, they were the two notable. They contacted me both almost immediately, and Matt, I'll use Eric first. In fact, Eric and I officially have never spoken to this day.
Interesting.
He would send his minions to me, and this minions, like, after, like, I'd only done my third interview at that point, and now I've lost count. It's hundreds. And his minions said, Eric's not very happy with you. He wants you to not mention the Orlando Ferguson map anymore, and he doesn't want you to use Crow 777's moon footage anymore. And if you don't do this, he's going to start to discredit you. And I'm like, I have no idea who Eric is. Honestly, it's like, okay, one, who are you? And second, who are you to tell me all this stuff, right? And he wasn't alone. Sorry, phone just doesn't stop ringing.
Yeah, no problem.
The other guy was, and so Eric started discrediting me, and he immediately says, "Oh, Mark is a government agent, and he cannot be trusted." Literally, that was put out there 4 years ago. Matt Boylan did the same freaking thing, and they didn't talk about this on the documentary really, where Matt wrote me. Matt, out of all the people, Matt, I will say this, his instincts are pretty honed. You run into people like that, where they make terrible life decisions, but sometimes their instincts are really spooky. He called me when I had only done like Clue 8, and he goes, and literally, I mean, out of the blue, and he goes, "Why aren't you returning my texts?" And I go, "Because I don't have a cell phone." It was, I had a landline. If you text somebody on a landline, it goes nowhere. It doesn't bounce back. It just goes nowhere. And then the first email he wrote me, and I still have it on my machine to this day, I put it on the cloud. He said, "Okay, here's what I want you to start. Okay, what you saw in the movie was absolutely true. Where people were calling me, and it felt like high school, where it's like, oh, will your friend go to Sadie Hawkins with me? And people were calling me." Seriously, and saying, it's like, "So you're into flat Earth, right?" It's like, "Do you know how to get hold of Matt Boylan? I think he's cute." It's like, what? And Matt was going, no interviews. It's like playing that coy BS. And he then he emails me, because now he realizes I'm doing interviews, and he says, "Okay, here's what I want you to start doing in your interviews." I need you to start attacking the Catholic Church. I'm going, what? Why would I do it? He goes, especially the Jesuits. You got to attack the Jesuits, man. They're behind a lot of this. I'm going, no, I'm not going to do anything. He goes, you don't do this. Same thing. And I will start to discredit you. I'm going, screw you. I'm not doing it. And sure enough, between those two guys, they did so much damage. To this day, literally to this day, 4 years later, I get comments every single day on my YouTube videos that say, you're a shill, even though they have no idea what the definition of shill is. Do you know what it is, by the way?
It's like a stand-in for an organization, right? Like a Monsanto shill?
Yes, but it was initially from the old world word shillabur, which is carnival's assistant. And if you're wondering where that comes from, it's like that is the guy that, if you've ever been to a carnival, right? The guy that's doing the ring toss. He's got 3 things for $1, 3 throws for $1, right? And you have a guy over behind you that says, this holding a giant panda bear saying, oh, I totally won this. It's a piece of cake. You got it. Right?
Yeah.
And that guy works, of course, for that. And so people throw that term out there all the time. But you throw it out there enough, and, you repeat, Hitler said it, you repeat something loud enough and long enough, it will start to sink in. And so that's what, yeah. So I don't mind too much of it because I know where it came from. It annoys me to some degree to where I do not. I don't know if I said this in the movie or not. I don't read comments much because I want to sleep at night. The old saying it used to be, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. That's not true anymore.
I know, especially online.
Yeah, if you can't say something nice, you're probably in the YouTube forums. I mean, seriously, I try. Remember, part of what I do, being the freshman recruiter, is I try to keep people upbeat in the community. Because remember, like you said, I don't like getting emails and people yelling at me. Oh my God, I get people all the time. It's like, Mark, help me, I'm getting just destroyed. And I go, you gotta understand. I go, in the immortal words of Taylor Swift, haters gonna hate, 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 hate. Seriously, I could make a video. I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it. I could make a video of a puppy being chased by a kitten on a beautiful meadow of flowers, and those two are being chased by a beautiful butterfly.
And you'll still have,
and people will be like, within, not even a couple hours, people will be like, this is effing gay, thumbs down, unsubscribe. It's like,
right? Yeah.
What? You weren't even subscribed in the first place. I don't care. I'm just going to say it.
Yeah, no, totally.
Anyway.
But so I guess on that, I think part of that is why I have trouble with conspiracy theories,
right.
Because I think anybody who's evaluating one, so when you come across one, while arguments can be made that say that one person is doing something, or that one organization is doing something that's negatively affecting people, then you could have the opposite organization making up that conspiracy, right? So, for example,
the disinfo theory.
The disinformation, right?
Yeah.
So when I hear people, for example, talk about like the Sandy Hook shooting, and they talk about how the kids were stand-in actors, well, how do you know that conspiracy wasn't sort of disinformation created by gun lobbies, right? Or other corporations that stand to profit? And how do you know that like the 9/11 conspiracy videos weren't disinformation created by like the Taliban or Al-Qaeda in order to try to sow discord among people in the U.S.?
Sure.
And how do you know? So how do you choose to believe, or with vaccinations too, right? So with vaccinations, it's interesting because while there might be like some risks associated with any sort of medical procedure, the risks about vaccines, according to research, are exaggerated. And there's continual research studies from universities, not from the pharmaceutical companies, showing no link between autism and vaccines. And these vaccines are important for not having measles outbreaks like we're having in Dallas and California and in other places. And so I guess, one of my concerns, because my research area is science communication, I wonder, like, while I want people to be skeptical consumers of information for sure, from a person perspective, if you're evaluating information, how do you decide who's the malicious actor and who's the victim?
Boy, that's one of the best questions I've gotten all year, and I know it's only March. Uh, but okay, this kind of goes along with what we started with, because somebody asked me recently on an interview what defines a conspiracy theorist, and that is, it comes down to, and it's not even a straight line. What we again, we all know there's lies, but what
Right.
level of lies, we all draw that the imaginary line, which is, and I used to think kind of it was like a straight line, but it's not. It's really bumpy, which is what lies we're willing to say, oh yeah, they're lies, and everything on this side is a lie, and everything on that side is the truth, right? And that line really varies from person to person, but it's a slippery slope, like what you're saying. There is no definitive way to. There's no mathematical qualifier for what you're asking, meaning because people, it comes down, oh, how many environmental factors, you know.
Well, how about you? Like, how do you choose? Like for Sandy Hook, how do you choose between believing the gun lobby's not responsible versus believing that the Sandy Hook thing wasn't fake?
I play in most of the conspiracies. I play the odds, but I'm different than most people. A lot of
No, I know. Asking
but that's fine.
you.
I mean, let me compare myself to others. So other conspiracy people, they just like, they don't, once they get to a certain point of I don't trust this, I don't trust this. Eventually, it'll tip, and then they will be, I don't trust anything. They look at everything with a skeptical eye, extreme skepticism, including their own people. It's like, seriously, people right next to them, it's like, you better not do anything suspicious, even though we're on the same team, including me.
Right.
But for me, I put myself in, it's very, very different, which is how I got to do the flat earth thing, was I put myself in the side of the greater good. Meaning, I put myself in, it's like, okay, fine, it's a conspiracy. I turn the chessboard around and I say, why would you do that? Exactly. What do you benefit? What does the person on the other side benefit? So when I look at 9/11 or Sandy Hook or JFK or Pearl Harbor, every American war, I put myself in their shoes and it's like, okay, would I do this? And what is the cost? Does the end justify the means? Because that's really what it boils down to. I mean, come on, when it comes to the really big, sorry, what? Go ahead.
Could you do the opposite though too? So you could say, is it possible that this is true, right? Does the end justify the
Right.
means? But could you also say, does creating this conspiracy narrative, is that also possible? Is
Possible. Oh
there
yeah, yeah, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, disinfo. Come on, we're talking about military intelligence 101. Deception is a huge part of war, and every spy. I mean, come on, categorically, it's such a weird paradox. I mean, categorically, we don't even have spies, even though we have a massive intelligence operation. Until a spy is caught, we have no spies. And it's like, oh yeah, that spy. We don't have any other spies. Until the U-2 spy plane is shot down. Blah blah blah. So when it comes to, yeah, could there be disinfo on multiple levels being perpetrated to do the exact opposite of what you're thinking? Sure, of course there could be. Sandy Hook, let's use Sandy Hook as an example. You know what? Let's do two real quick. Sandy Hook, for me, was different because I look at it from probability standpoint. Now, yeah, motivation, that's absolutely in question. You're absolutely right. Regardless of what you think of Sandy Hook, the motivation for Sandy Hook, that still to this day is really ethereal, because I'm still scratching my head. It's like, okay, who really benefit? Yeah, you could say, okay, the gun people is a Republican versus Democrat thing. Is it a gun thing versus a non-gun thing? There's not a lot of things to choose from there. Or is it just a fear-based beat, which is, it's a dangerous world out there. You need us, right? There's danger everywhere. Don't forget about us, because if a society becomes too complacent, then bad things can happen. The vaccines, here, and I have to address this with you, which is, think about it this way: the public needs a target, plain and simple. Doesn't matter if there isn't any scientific evidence, and I know this is going to sound really shallow and weird. It doesn't matter if there's really any scientific evidence to prove or not whether autism is connected with the vaccines in some way. Something is causing it. When the autism rate goes from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 40, and I can't even do the math in my head right now. That's just a ridiculous, huge jump. It's got to be something, and the people want an answer.
right? Well, and they have answers. Well, there's a couple.
Not the answers they want to hear, unless it's the water, the food, or the air.
Because it's not something that they can control, right? Now, I think one of the answers that I talked to when I was in graduate school,
Right.
a person who studied autism, said actually online dating was a big one.
If you
Um,
try, by the way, if you try to publish that in the news,
oh,
you will get destroyed.
sure. I'm not, no, and I'm not going to do it. This is not my
Right,
research.
right. No, I'm
But
just saying that that guy would never be able to tell that story anywhere.
yeah, but this is why. So the idea is that autism is a spectrum disorder, right? It is not something that is like a you have it or you don't,
Sure.
right? There's a, a huge continuum.
Right.
And when people are lower on the continuum,
Right.
then they're just the kind of slightly odd person.
Right.
And that's probably true for most people in academia, right? Just the slightly odd person who is a little socially awkward or whatever. In small communities before online dating,
Right.
those people may not necessarily find a partner
Right.
to marry and have kids with.
Right.
Like the weirder they get, the less likely they are to find a partner. You bring online dating into the mix, and now you have people finding matches who are more similar to them. And they call it broad autistic phenotype. And they say broad autistic phenotype plus broad autistic phenotype
Right.
equals a child with a more severe case
Right.
of autism.
Right.
And they tend to find larger instances of autism in people who have more with what they refer to as like masculine brain type jobs.
Sure.
So people who are coders or computer engineers or mathematicians or physicists. And so it seems to be a sort of like exponential effect of genetics over time.
Right.
But you're right, you can't control that really.
Right.
And so you don't have a person to blame for it.
I mean, that's
and
an interesting. I've never heard that one, obviously, and that's not bad. I like, of course, pinning the blame. Oh my God, it's because online dating is such a fluffy sort of internet topic. Trying to pin. Sorry, go ahead.
I wouldn't necessarily blame. And that's the thing. Like, I don't think it's to blame.
Well, no.
It's,
Remember, the public wants
to blame.
the mob. This goes back to Rome. The mob wants the head of somebody. And let me throw this at you real quick, and we have time, which is unless you want to bug out, which is I try. The old saying is 9 out of 10 problems in the world revolve around money. And think of it this way: when it comes to, you gotta remember, the Robert De Niro thing was very interesting. How he was going to release it, and they went to him and basically said, "Your legacy will be destroyed if you do this." But wait, I know you're going to jump in. Think of it like this: in the old days, because I'm older, the vaccines were very limited, and probably know where I'm going with this. But
How old are you?
but the what?
How old are you?
83. I'm no, I'm 50.
Okay, I'm 36.
Oh.
I'm young, but I'm not like.
Okay. So your vaccines would have been a little more, but not as less as mine. I mean, I think we may have had like half a dozen back in the day. The thing with vaccines, like anything in America is basically the ones that screw everything up, because we take it too far always. And that is when pharmaceutical companies realize it's like, no, the program you really need to get into is vaccines. If you can get your drug into the vaccine regimen, you will make a huge amount of money on a regular basis. It is clockwork. It is guaranteed. Here's the problem. And it's a slippery slope, because, okay, this vaccine gets in, and this vaccine, it goes from 10 to 20 to 30. And it doesn't sound like a huge jump, but then you're talking about chessboard math, which is, okay, back in the day, you only had to test these 6 versus these 6 and the 8 blood types and 2 genders. And, you could test this shit, right? But when you're talking about 30, you're talking about exponentially higher levels of testing. And then you have a bigger problem, which is if there is a problem, and remember, it's a rush to market, not to pit it on the scientists, which is, let's say you have a problem between vaccine 2 and vaccine 7 in males under the age of 3 or whatever it is, maybe African-American, maybe not, right? You have a guaranteed problem, and you don't find this out until 2 years after it's already been to market. And this is attorneys' rules, right? Attorneys run the world to a lesser degree, which is the attorneys will tell you, it's like, no, you never, ever, ever admit guilt until they absolutely have you. And so if there is this drug, no company, even if they know full well there is a problem, a conflict between, can say it, because their company will be involved in class action and it'll be wiped out. It is gone. Your company is gone instantly. People protect their own at all costs. And I would be the first one to say, look, I'm not talking about a conspiracy. I would have done the same thing. Look, if your lawyer comes to you, your lab comes to you and says, we have a problem with this and this. There's a new vaccine introduced in the market from this company over here. It's conflict with ours, and it causes this. What do you do? What do you do inside that corporation? You protect your own. Plain and simple. There's nothing else you can do.
And I agree with your logic there. But then the other question that I would have is, so while it's completely possible that if somebody found a problem with the vaccine, that particularly if it's owned by a company, that the company is going to try to cover that up. Totally buy that. In what way? So let's assume from a public health standpoint that we're trying to avoid childhood diseases that kill children, right? Either kill or have severe problems, things like polio, measles, others to that extent, diphtheria, pertussis. In what situation could you develop treatments for that don't have the problem of being part of a market in some way, particularly in a capitalist society?
No. You're right. And trust me, I have thought about the vaccine issue for a long time, trying to think of, okay, well, is there a broader solution to this? Because we're talking about something now that's not going to stop. This is not, and I do believe in this, and it's not going to get better. I'll use the quick example of, because people forget about the old stuff, even though it was only 20 years ago. The reason why big tobacco went, into those massive lawsuits and lost wasn't because people were getting sick and dying. It had nothing to do with that. It was because the health insurance companies were footing the bill for freaking bronchitis and lung cancer, and they were losing their freaking shirts. It was because it was big money versus big money. The insurance companies went after tobacco. It wasn't people. Oh yeah, the people were on trial. It's like, oh, secondhand smoke and all this. No, it was the huge, massive health insurance lawyers. Compare that to now. There is no legal thing. There is no class action suit you can bring against the big pharma, because you don't know which company it is. They can, the labs are all controlled, and you don't have any big money behind you. So the answer to your question, like how would you solve this? More extensive testing and transparency, and somebody freaking falling on their sword. That'd be, and I wish it was possible, but it's not.
Would it help if vaccines or treatments for those types of disorders were not? Now I know this is not going to happen, but like in a perfect world. If vaccines and treatments were developed by universities as opposed to corporations.
Yes. And hope to God that there's no corruption in that, because as you know, all it takes is one or two great people to.
Well, so one thing that I hear a lot I mean, you may already know this, but one conspiracy about universities is that we'll perpetuate diseases and disorders because we get tons of money to try to solve them. We don't get that money.
No, I don't buy it for a second. It's when things get privatized that, again, greed's one of the seven deadly, and there's a reason for it. Corporations always will take it too far. Not to use the Wolf on Wall Street example, but we don't know when to. Men, especially women, get a pass. Men do not know when to stop. They just keep. There is not enough. Nothing is too much. Money and power and greed, again, which is why the Antarctic Treaty thing, let's circle back around to flat earth real quick, which is why that was one of those things that just was a huge red flag for me, which was, wait a minute, there's billions and billions and billions of dollars down there and nobody's going after it. Since when, right? We will frack in your backyard tomorrow if we can. We will cut you a check and we will be there. And you're in fracking, you've seen fracking, right? Yeah, but yet Antarctica is off limits, and nobody even, and this is something they didn't even talk about in the documentary real quick, which is that nobody is even objecting to it. So if I'm the head of British Petroleum, I would be running full page ads in the London Times every freaking month. How great it would be for us to go to freaking Antarctica. And they're not even allowed to talk about it. So something's happening at the highest level, which is like, call it national security, whatever. Sorry, back to your vaccine thing. In a perfect world, you're absolutely right. If a private company should stay out of vaccines entirely. You know what? There's your answer right there. I didn't even think about it till just now. If universities should develop vaccines, if the corporations want to help, they should do it for a non-profit reason. I mean, if you want to donate money to a university to develop vaccines, which they all should anyway in a perfect world, they should, and then not reap any benefits. When it's done for profit, people cut corners, and they will do anything they can to maximize profits. Plain and simple.
So would you say then, what do you think about capitalism versus other organizations?
It's not perfect, but because I've had to look at this world and had to break it down and see how many, because I really, over the last 4 or 5 years, I've had to look at it from, okay, if I was going to build it, if I was going to revamp it or do, what would I do? Right now, capitalism, given what human beings are and the competitive nature, is the best show in town, which is why America, even though I have no idea why it's still standing, after the 2008 crisis, it's still the best show in town because capitalism motivates people. That sounds silly, but come on, we've all heard the stories of the Soviet Union, which isn't there anymore. So communism has its aspects, right?
Mm-hmm.
But capitalism drives people. It gets people off their asses, and it's like, look, how many things have we developed and invented because of capitalism? Tons.
So then, is it one of those things where, because of the capitalist nature of society,
right,
the sort of error rate for using that, right? So it's got all these benefits in terms of developing new products, and people are motivated, right, to create new things, and then there's competition between products.
Right.
We sort of accept as the error rate the fact that in some circumstances, at some levels, there's going to be lying, cheating, and stealing, and that there's going to be this sort of distrust of the organizations creating these products because of the lying, cheating, and stealing.
Yeah, and everybody knows. Come on, unless you're super, super naive, everybody knows that anyway. Look, corporations. There's a reason why there's a term called corporate espionage, right? People will, in fact, every story I ever hear nowadays where it's like, oh, there was a mouse found in McDonald's, or is there a mouse found in Qdoba? It's like, all right, somebody, because there's no reason that story should even be there, right? But corporations hate each other. It's ruthless. Sports carries straight over to corporations. There's really not very much difference there. What I'm saying is that eventually, I shouldn't say decency isn't even the right word, the greater good and the ability to hit the brakes, at least temporarily, and say, look, give back. You got this far. Give back to the society that got you that far. Don't keep asking for more and more tax breaks. You've got enough. And look, how many yachts can you own? I don't care if your private jet is 2 years old. Right, you don't need another freaking private jet right now. But again, that's kind of hypocrisy because we teach people that's what you should shoot for.
But to a certain level, right?
Yeah.
So do you believe corporations and the government kind of check each other?
Check each other or work with each other. They're basically the same thing now. Eisenhower's military-industrial complex was once that merged. I mean, that didn't even happen. Corporation ever since the 60s. That's what he helped build. He hated the fact that he did it, and he warned everybody. I mean, talk about the weirdest, what do they call it? Address when he's leaving. Whatever. He was leaving office, right? And his last speech was, "Watch out, because there's something coming." But that was natural anyway. The corporations, once the government started working with these corporations, the meetings go hand in hand.
But realistically, you could have corporations that aren't being invited that get jealous and try to attack or call that out.
Yes.
And then you have different political parties that, I mean, in some ways, unfortunately, the government isn't super unified, right? There's all these different divisions, and they're always
unified. That's a kind way of saying it.
Yeah, well, I mean, so it's hard for I talk about the government as office as one thing, but it's a lot of separate pieces that fight amongst one another, and in some ways make it completely defective.
Right.
But so in that sense, different corporations in different parts of government are working at odds with one another at different times. So while you say that like the Republican Party traditionally, maybe not moving forward, but traditionally has been in combination with military industry to combine those two, but then you're getting pushback from like other types of industry as well as from within like more progressive or liberal parties. So that's sort of what I mean by the checking on each other.
They don't check each other that. I mean, yeah, and some levels really it comes into layers, which is once you get past the layer of quibbling between Democratic and Republican. I mean, come on, The Simpsons did an episode on this years ago called the Kang and Kodos episode, where it didn't matter who you were voting for, and really that was also a Matrix line, which is. There's the illusion of choice, which is, you vote for this guy or this guy, then you are identified with this guy and this guy. If something went wrong, I'm going to blame it on Obama. If something went right, I'm going to blame it on Trump, and vice versa, right? But when you get up to the highest level, that doesn't make any difference. In fact, here's a great line I throw at people every once in a while, which is, let's say you're a billionaire right now, right? And I don't care. I don't know what your leanings are. We'll just pretend that I don't know. And so you have $1 billion. Who do you donate to in the next election? And then, do you go Republican or Democrat? And then you get into, because I'm into, these sort of rights, I'm, Democrat, or because I'm this corporate thing, I'm going to go Republican. I go, no. You're going to donate to both. Because remember, at the highest levels, the politicians do not care where the money comes from. And they don't care if you wrote checks to both sides. You're hedging your bets. Either way. And if you spend enough money, you actually get an audience with this person, not just a pick that you can put on your mantle, right? You and the president. You can actually influence policy, and if you're really rich, you can influence policy quite a bit. And you're saying, okay, Mark, what's your point? My point is that you were a multi-billionaire to do this, and this is not to make you sad, but if you're not a multi-billionaire, what exactly are you voting for? I mean, your vote. Come on, everybody knows. I mean, especially after the last thing. No offense, because I don't vote either way. I've never voted in my life. But come on, we elected a reality television star as president of the United States. That was a movie idea some years ago, and now people, Idiocracy, which I thought was the silliest movie ever, and now people are watching this going, it's prophetic. So, anyway.
No, well, and so that. I think a lot of that comes down to policy too. So you have that Supreme Court judgment about corporations being people. I can't remember what the name of it is, but so they have a voice. So being able to donate money and also the difference. So popular vote versus I think it's very interesting, and there's a lot of stuff. So I apologize for asking. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer. I know we've been sort of talking.
Oh no, it's okay. And I just I will send you the audio recording of this. I won't put it. I'm not going to put it up anywhere. It's just you and me.
Right.
No, I don't have too many questions. It was curious to me because I've seen it so many times because I have to follow the media now and see what they're talking about. And I saw your story, and I can't remember who first broke it.
The Guardian.
The Guardian.
Yeah.
Okay.
The Guardian.
Yeah. And of course, it was a perfect example because people love grabbing the Guardian stuff. And then it just started spreading from there and different versions of it. And I thought it was very curious. And it's like, really? But I knew where your head was at, kind of.
Well, that's good.
And no, I know. Nobody in the flat earth community, I shouldn't say nobody, but most people don't think anything of it. It's like, because it's obvious to us. We look at it in that other thing. It's like, well, yeah, YouTube is where we are. It's not. But at the same,
I just think it's really interesting. It's I think it's interesting that there's a community that sort of is based in YouTube and in that sort of method of communication. But I wasn't trying to blame.
Oh no,
YouTube,
no, and of course,
or saying that there should be censorship.
No,
I wasn't saying that either.
Part of me kind of wants to be, because we're being kind of painted ever since the documentary, kind of being painted as villains. Recently, which is fine. I don't mind that. Villains are good characters anyway. Look, people, there's a reason why there's villains in stories. You need a protagonist and an antagonist. And this thing has, if they use your article to do more of a villain stuff, it's like, well, we got to do something about YouTube. I don't think they're going to be addressing it anytime soon because they just addressed it recently, which was weird.
Yeah.
In fact, when did you do your study?
Well, like I said, my study had nothing to do with that line that they grabbed out. My study was just evaluating the different types of arguments that you guys made and seeing how they resonated with different people. And then I had mentioned along the reason why we were doing this with YouTube videos was because it's a YouTube-based community.
And they took that one line and blossomed it into
one line, and it became a whole thing.
Wow.
And
well, good for you in some ways. I mean, in some ways that's better than being published because it's like, hey, look at that.
Well, in some way, it depends, right? Who do I want respect from? It's not helpful among my community members because it's like one line taken out of context of that. But anyway, yeah, so you're right. YouTube had just sort of addressed their algorithms, and I don't think that they should censor people. I also have a hard time with the algorithms. I think if I was going to blame anything for bad stuff,
Yeah.
generally, it would be algorithms, and it would be less for like the propagation of misinformation as much as the sorting us into different groups.
Right.
So we're not likely to see information, and this is particularly true for Facebook,
Right.
less for YouTube.
Right.
For Facebook, when our newsfeed shows us things it thinks we're most likely to like and engage with, which is often things that we agree with because we have this thing called confirmation bias, right? We only like to look at information that confirms our existing views, not stuff that disconfirms it, generally speaking. There's variance in that. So our Facebook walls tend to, and like I at this conference I was just at where they picked up this line, there was a computer scientist who had run these different models of information diffusion through online networks like Twitter and Facebook, and it found that like in any version of the system that people are allowed to choose who they're friends with and to disconnect from people they don't want to be friends with, information is going to end up in these echo chambers if they're using algorithms. And so it's just like it's frustrating because then people aren't getting all the information, right? You want people to get all the information.
It's true.
And they're cultivating and sorting information in ways where they're sort of maximizing our biases kind of against us.
It's it's like it's creating, for lack of a better term, it's building an echo chamber around them while it's happening, slowly but surely. It just keeps brick by brick until finally you're inside it.
Yeah, and we're already likely to do that anyway.
Right.
So it's like we're likely to, if you're liberal, you watch MSNBC. If you're conservative, you watch Fox News. I mean, we already sort of sort ourselves that way. But instead of helping make it better, so we're more likely to see information, even if it is conflicting with our existing views. Right. Now we're less likely to see it, and it's showing us more and more extreme information. And I agree that there's a problem with the media. I think that I think the media serves a necessary and important component to our society. But I think that, while I like the idea of a user-based media thing as well, right? So not just relying on certain organizations to report, having many people report. One of the negative sides of that is that you have people who are not held to the same sorts of norms and standards that we do in media. And there's been this sort of default to create clickbait, right? Making the title of the article, "Researcher Blames YouTube," is clickbait. That in fact, the Guardian's article generally was pretty accurate in terms of what I was saying, but the title,
because that's all that matters. They know that there is no time to skim articles anymore. The title is your only shot. That's it.
Yeah.
There's a great, I should send you a video if I get a chance. There was something, of all things, it was a movie review place on YouTube called Red Letter Media, and there was a guy that coined a term. It's not popular. It's called the blurring effect, which I thought was very, very interesting, where he said that what I talked about earlier, media has gotten so broad. It is so huge and so many, you can't even begin. So the only way that corporations can break into this is to redo. That's why you see so many reboots. It's not because it's like your only chance the project may work is if you can call back to an earlier memory for these people. And so, so they're rebooting every franchise that they can. And for the first time ever, you're seeing encore performances of television shows. That's never happened in the history of television. And that's because, I remember Will and Grace. Well, how about some more Will and Grace episodes? Wait, didn't they canceled like 8 years ago? It's like, yeah, we'll bring them back. And so on and so on. And to that effect, Flat Earth, one of the reasons why Flat Earth has done so well, is Flat Earth is the ultimate knife against the blurring effect, because everybody knows the term, which I think is fascinating. Think of it this way. Of all the people you've talked to and all the people you see online, it's like Flat Earth, love it or hate it, probably the most polarizing thing ever, right? I have never run into a person ever out of thousands and thousands and thousands of people that said, Flat Earth, never heard of it.
Right. Yeah.
Everybody knows it. It's the only thing we debunk to children. which even though we don't say it, but I'm sure all the teachers like, we used to believe in the earth is flat. Now it's the globe. Here it is, children. I'm going to put this off in the corner. It's going to sit there for the next 12 years. And that's it. I mean, we don't tell kids about JFK or 9/11 or any of that other stuff. We only tell them about that. I thought that was, again, conspiracy within a conspiracy.
Yeah. Well, in part, I think it's sort of an interesting history on the conflict between religion and science.
Yeah. The never-ending war between religion and science.
But they can be compatible.
They can't. It's funny you'd mention this, and then I'll have to wrap this up in a bit because I get ready for the next one. But there was I had a chance to do a debate down in Los Angeles with a guy named Jeff Zwernick. He's an astrophysicist down at UCLA, I think, and he's also a very strong Christian, which is weird. He is not loved in the community because he preaches both. He goes to church every Sunday, and he's trying desperately to merge the two. He's saying science and religion can work together. And
have you heard of Catherine Hayhoe?
Who?
Catherine Hayhoe?
No.
She's a climate scientist and an evangelical Christian.
And she's kind of going down that same road.
Yeah, she's here in Lubbock. She met with the Pope and Leonardo DiCaprio and is part of the group that works on climate science research, and is, her husband is an evangelical preacher, and she's a very strong, and she has tons of conspiracies about her, I know, and she always gets angry emails as well.
Did you ever see, okay, I'll end on this, I swear to God, which is because you mentioned the Pope and Leonardo DiCaprio, and I don't think it's an accident. I think it's synchronicity, because it's a weird part of my speech for 2019. Did you know about so you knew, again,
I know there are people who are very interested in climate science. Like the Pope, put out the papal encyclical, and Leonardo DiCaprio was really interested in environmentalism. That's why I mentioned those two.
Well, it's fascinating, though, because literally 3 weeks ago, I used slides of Leonardo DiCaprio and the Pope on my screen behind me, right? But here's the weird thing. You probably don't know this. Because remember, if you're an A-lister, right? A-lister, you will still only get 15 minutes with the Pope at the Vatican, and so he's there. And you're thinking, 15 minutes, right? You're going to talk about climate change? I know there's probably backroom things and whatever. But he opens up a book of artwork from 500 years ago and shows him. And it was on video. And I'm watching this back in 2016. I was going, what the hell is he doing? He shows him an image. It's called the Garden of Earthly Delights by Hieronymus Bosch. It's a flat enclosed world map. And he shows it. He shows it to him, and he goes, this hung above my crib as a child. And he goes, and to me, it represents the promise of the future and enlightenment. It's like, and I'm watching this, right? I got friends that are watching. I'm going, I don't know what this means. What does this mean? Is this a thing? If you haven't seen it, you really ought to. It's fascinating. And then after that, that Pope met with the Orthodox Russian Pope, first time in 1,000 years, and that guy went down to Antarctica for no apparent reason whatsoever. It's like, why is he down there? Unless it was, you could say it was climate change. Maybe it was. John?
Yeah, there's a lot of climate research that goes on at Antarctica.
Oh, I'm sure there is.
So it's different. Well, and it's different. What's interesting about the ice melting patterns are different for the Arctic versus the Antarctic, because the Arctic doesn't have land under it. It is just ice, and Antarctic does have rock and land underneath it. So the melting rates are different, and so anyway, it's interesting. But
so what are you doing now? You're just kind of doing your
today?
Moving forward with your research. You doing anything interesting?
I'm trying to write the YouTube paper, which again is just sort of which arguments are resonating with different kinds of people. And then I have the interview paper, which I'm working on, which just talks about, again, in some ways it's, I viewed the movie as a positive thing for the flat Earth community.
It was.
Because I think it shows, again, it disconfirms the myths that it's a bunch of people who are trolls,
right,
or who are paranoid,
right,
or who are science illiterate.
Right.
And so I think that those are kind of like the three myths about the flat Earth community, and honestly about any sort of community that denies a form of science. Right. And it's just like, no, the problem is that people are interpreting information through their worldview lenses. And so some information is going to seem accurate to them, and some information is going to seem not accurate to them. And how do we sort of how do we work with that, right? So how do we, if we know what we're doing, like we can, right? So we can trust ourselves. We know we're doing this research. We really believe that this research is important and is meaningful and should be known. How do we try not to become to a shill in a conspiracy,
Right.
or how do we, I work with tons of climate science researchers. I know there's a ton of people who deny climate change. They're really doing their work. They have their data, they have their evidence, they have what they've been doing. And they're not
and just so you know, climate change is real. And there's a lot of flat earthers that say it's not. No, for me, it's absolutely real. Because again, if it's enclosed, what do you think's going to happen? And is it just human based? Well, I mean, it's absolutely human based.
It is enclosed, right? And so even whether you think it's enclosed by like a firmament,
Right.
sort of like a hard thing, or by the atmosphere.
Right.
So Catherine Hayhoe, when she describes how climate change works, she talks about the process of, we do have a somewhat porous atmosphere, and you have carbon being created in here, and it's like this push-pull through, and I'm not a climate scientist, so I don't, but it's like this push through. But then when you start creating more in, it ends up making it harder to leave. And I wish I could remember her.
No, I got you.
But anyway, so it traps it in, and we're ending up like sitting in our own heat.
Yeah.
So anyway,
same thing in my model. Absolutely. No different than. What was that?
We had a problem with connection there.
Oh, no worries.
But I know you need to go.
Yeah, same sort of thing in my model. Absolutely. It's just that whatever the automated systems that are trying to work with this atmosphere, they're having a problem because of what we're generating. Come on, we get 7 billion people. You know how many? Every car is a furnace. Did you ever get
and
what?
Cow burps.
Oh yeah, cow burps. Right.
Cow burps are like one of the weirdest things. Like it's a huge and trash burning, like all the things that we do. We just we're not kind to the whole thing. Anyway, it was lovely speaking with you. Yeah, nice speaking to you too.
If something else comes up, or if you need me for anything else, feel free to reach out. If you need anybody else in the community, if for some reason, I don't care who it is, I'm pretty much wired in. So if you can think of somebody, just say, hey, I've been trying, because some of these guys are really tough at getting back to people, mostly because of suspicion. If I vouch for whoever it is, it's like, oh, they're fine, you're fine. It's okay. So feel free.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. I appreciate it.
Have a good day.
Bye.
So, how are you?
I'm good. I have so many questions for you, and I'm sure that you want to talk to me as well.
You know what? Hit me with whatever you got. I mean, we'll bounce back and forth a little bit anyway.
Yeah, sure.
Did you want me to record this or not? For your sake? I mean, do you want the notes for later? Because I mean, sometimes because I talk to people like you quite often, and people like scribbling notes. I was going, we can record.
No,
this.
that would be. Sorry, I just broke my pen. That would be great.
Okay. Done.
Awesome. Yeah, I am. My only concern about being on the podcast.
Oh no, I won't publish it if you don't want.
Oh yeah, no. Well, I was just telling you, like, I actually am. I am in complete agreement that there needs to be more dialogue between different groups of people who do different things. And one of the things I felt so bad about when we were doing our interviews was people saying that when they wanted to ask scientists questions, that they felt like they were sort of like angry or closed off, or they wouldn't respond. So I'm all about that. However, what I don't like is angry emails. I don't have the constitution for it. And I've been getting some of those already. And I just know that like the more active publicity, or, me being on your show, I just want to kind of avoid some of that.
Oh, this isn't a show, by the way. This is just you and I talking.
Oh, no, this is. I meant like putting it or being on a podcast or.
Oh, gotcha. I mean, I'm just recording the audio part. The video part, we're not doing anything.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I get you. Look, it takes a thick skin. It really does. And it's weird because you're on the other side of the fence. I mean, obviously you're not with us. And so the other side of the fence doesn't get that much hate, but ever since that Netflix thing happened, it just went crazy. I had you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, no, of course.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I actually met the producer and director.
Oh, you talked to him?
Yeah, no, yeah, I met them at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. And I've seen the movie at least 3 times now.
They were
I
at
think.
the film festival in Chicago.
No, 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 no. It was just so the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago had a film series,
Yeah.
and
Oh
one of
yeah,
the,
yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm sorry. And Behind the Curve played there. You're absolutely right. In
yeah,
fact,
exactly.
it
Yeah,
was one of the last showings before it went into distribution.
on Netflix. Yeah,
Right.
and again, like one of the big things that we were both saying, both the director and producer who were there and
Right.
me, and that the museum completely supported is it's unfair to say that these people are crazy or stupid.
Right.
So that was like a big part of what we were talking about, and trying to push that back.
Right.
So, but I'm getting like, I think in part so I presented research that was talking mostly about, so we tested some of Eric Dubé's arguments, the 200 proofs the Earth is not a spinning ball,
Sure.
just as examples of different types of arguments. So
Right.
there's like religious argument, right? And then there were some of like the experiments that were talked about. And then there were the sort of like conspiracy based experiments talking about like NASA editing photos.
Right.
And so we wanted to see how those differed, well, how people rated those arguments, right? What they found was most effective. But one of the things that I had mentioned too was that when we were interviewing people, that almost everybody had found this through YouTube, and that it really is a YouTube-based community.
Oh yeah.
And that got turned into, researcher blames YouTube for propagation of flat Earth. And then I started getting emails from people who, like, one of them was actually kind of funny. They said that they nominated me for Minister of Truth, from like 1984. But I wasn't even saying that stuff should be censored or anything. I was just saying that, if we have, people looking for science on YouTube,
Right.
then scientists should take advantage and communicate with people where the people are looking.
Right. There were two sides. It was interesting when I saw that story start to blossom because it's weird. The media has gotten to the stage now where they don't even have to give credit necessarily to the original article. They just say, oh yeah, some such and such down there, they said blah, blah, blah. And everyone just rips off each other. And it could have been taken two ways. One was, okay, were you calling, and I know where you were coming from. Or were you calling? It's like, look, you want to point the blame at somebody, blame it on YouTube. And the other people were like looking at like, why is this a story? It's the most obvious thing in the world, of course. To us, it's like, of course it's on YouTube because there are no other YouTube is the largest television network in the world now. Yeah. And I mean, thousands of lifetimes worth of content. So it's like, of course, what else would it be? Kind of like if you want to buy weird stuff, odds and ends, you go to eBay. You want to do a search. I mean, Google is now a verb.
Yeah, I know.
So there's certain things, benchmarks that are in there. You want to send money to people, PayPal. It's you want to look up movie reviews, Rotten Tomatoes, and so on and so on. So no, I knew when the story came out, but it was interesting that you kind of caught some pushback. But
yeah,
but at the same time, it was weird because when it came out, and I know you have questions, which is Congress. They met that special session when Google met with the United States government last year to talk about the problem of potentially quote unquote fake news. And out of all the topics they brought up flat Earth, which was interesting. Right. It's like, wow, really? Out of all the things you're going to bring up us, sorry, go ahead.
To be fair, one thing that I'll say is the reason why they use flat Earth as an example.
Yeah.
Because when you look at Congress and what they're polarized on, some of the things that they'll fight about, they will actually disagree amongst themselves in Congress.
Right.
So they can't talk about like climate change or vaccines or I understand that within the flat Earth community, there's a lot of pushback on some of those topics as well.
Right.
But I think that flat Earth is the one that right now is a small enough community that it is not in Congress. So they can sort of use that as a example of something that they all agree on.
You're absolutely right. And that's a good point. Yeah, we have no reps anywhere. Yeah, there's nothing. Yeah, you can't. It was funny because in the flat Earth community, in fact, there was somebody that was pitching a television show recently. And they were saying, oh, should it be an all-inclusive conspiracy show? I go, no, because there's some conspiracies you can't talk about now. You can't. I mean, look what happened to Robert De Niro when he tried to release a vaccination movie at his film festival. No, 9/11 is still touchy 20 years later. People don't want to talk about it and so on and so on. Anyway, sorry, questions. What do you have?
Oh yeah, well, so
What do you
the
got?
first thing I wanted to do, because, and this is what I do too when I'm talking to reporters, because I want to make them, I don't want them to take me out of context, is I want to define conspiracy theory. So when I say conspiracy theory, I'm not using it in a dismissive sense.
Right.
I'm using it as an explanation
Right.
that involves a group of people who are hiding something for some reason, right? So in the flat Earth community, the way that I've heard flat Earth described is that, like, NASA, for example, is either covering information up, or they're editing photos, or they're hiding it in a way. So to me, that's why I would call flat Earth a conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, look, I mean, the clinical definition of conspiracies, I think it's three people or more from a legal sense. I can tell you because I have been convicted of conspiracy years ago because I ran an illegal fireworks thing out of my university. Whole nother story for another time. Very, very interesting. But because I had three or more people involved, we conspired together.
Interesting.
To do this thing. So that's this whole separate charge. Like you get the actual crime, whatever it is, and then if you have other people involved, they can tack on conspiracy to it because, okay, you were working as a group.
Right. So yeah. So when I say that, again, I just mean, people who are working together as a group.
No.
So, and like I said, so I see flat Earth as a conspiracy theory in the sense that much of the explanation is that there are people who are hiding information or that they don't want you to know.
Sure.
Right. Okay, so some of the people that we talked to actually a large majority of the people who we talked to at the conference were biblical literalists.
Right.
So they believe.
Oh, you were at Denver.
Both.
You were
so
at Denver and
Raleigh. So I had research.
You were at Raleigh? I didn't. Did we talk?
No. My research. So I have research assistants who are there.
Oh, okay.
So doing this now. So I mean, they talked to Robbie. I talked to Robbie on the phone.
Got it.
A couple times. Now, so I don't think I've heard you say that you are a biblical literalist. Are you?
Wow, that's a tough call. Literalist, kind of, but I know people say, well, you're either you are or you aren't. It's like, okay,
No, I mean,
I'm not going to believe everything. I don't take it all literal, but there are a lot of things that are very literal to me.
Okay.
But I'm not as hardcore as others. Let's put it that way.
Right. And so I know when we've asked people, would you consider yourselves religious? They say no, because for them, they equate that term with sort of subscribing to dogma that comes from like authority in the church. But when I say it, I just mean, like, do you have some sort of faith-based view? So like, whether like you're Christian or
yeah.
So, but you would consider yourself religious in that sense?
Oh, absolutely. I was raised a strong born-again Christian. Church was not just a Sunday thing. We had youth group and vacation Bible school, and I went to Camp Malibu and so on and so on. And then, it was very, very active. And then I went to university. And by the way, I say university instead of college because outside the United States, if you didn't already know that, that whole thing. I learned that when I lived up in Canada. It's like, you can't say college. It's like, really?
Yeah, I heard you say that, and so I was wondering if you had lived in Canada.
I did. I lived in Victoria for a year, and that you learn pretty quick. It's like, you don't say college is technical college, which is interesting. America screws up so many little things like that. For us, college and university is literally the same term. So anyway, when I left the island and I went to university for the first time, that's when I realized, like, oh, there's other views, there's other things happening. The Christianity isn't the only religion in the world. And then I fell away from it, and then flat Earth snapped me back into a form of Christianity, but it was different than what it was before. Meaning now I respect the four major religious houses outside of Christianity, but at the same time, everybody, I think, full well. I mean, you've done the stats. For me, and maybe you know some of the numbers more than I do. At least half of the community, at least in the United States, are strong Christian. I mean, the conferences and the meetups I have gone to, look, they're quoting chapter and verse.
Yes,
So, yeah.
Well, and so one of the things that I was curious about with regard to that is, so one of the things that I studied when I went to university. So I, as an undergrad, I studied philosophy, and then I did some biology and psychology and communication. Yeah. And one of the things that we talked about was epistemology, right? And so that's how we know something, right? So what types of evidence are convincing to us?
Right.
And we talk about the different versions of this. We talk about testimony, right? So believing something from other people, firsthand evidence, right? When you've experienced it yourself.
Sure.
And then logic and reasoning when you can deduct or induct something, right, from evidence.
Right.
What it seems to me when I've spoken with people, when we talk to people from the flat earth community, is that there's a lot of distrust in testimony, because there's a recognition that anybody who's telling you haven't seen it firsthand, right? So if my mom tells me that she saw like a pink bird yesterday, I might like go, I mean, did you really see it? Like, there's a way you can prove to me. But one of the things that I think are interesting about the Bible, and this may apply less to you depending on, because you said like,
no, I can hold my own. No
but
worries.
but one of the questions is, well, if a lot of these institutions and authorities could be corrupted, might be corrupted, are corrupted.
Right.
What about the publishing companies that release biblical texts? And so how do we know that the Bible hasn't been corrupted in similar ways?
Are you kidding? That's an excellent point. And that is something that's been covered for years and years. Critics of the Bible have talked about that for a long time, which is, look, the Bible was technically written, published. Good point. You said that, published by man, from the Roman era. I mean, come on, from
different people too, right? So you have all sorts of different versions of it. You have the King James version, and
right.
I mean, if men are involved at all, so even, let's assume that there was a God-sanctioned text that could be produced. We clearly know that man can interfere and make information disinformation.
Absolutely right.
So why do you think, in your view, does the flat earth community, and in particular, because we know that there's a strong population of religious or biblical literalists in that group, is the Bible trustworthy?
You are correct. It is a leap of faith more than anything. The reason why the flat earth community has jumped on it, and it's really amazing, because it's not just Catholics versus Protestants, or or Christianity versus Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, or Islam, because 3 of those 5 share common stories, which is a whole nother thing. It's because out of all the stories from all the texts, there's only one verse in the entire Bible that even hints at the globe. That's where it gets interesting. It's like, it doesn't matter. Yeah, men publish the Bible, of course. And you can say, well, did men corrupt the Bible? And then you get into like, well, no, God wouldn't let them. I won't even get into that. But and I don't know if they quote you the chapter and verse, but it's Isaiah 40:22. He who sitteth upon the circle of the earth. And the religious scholars are quick to point out, it's like, look, circle is not globe, it's not ball, it's not sphere. It's a completely different word in Hebrew. So that's the only verse. Everything else says the same thing in different fashions. Everything from Genesis and the firmament to the earth is fixed and immovable, versus stuff I talked about in the clues, which I didn't even talk about the story of Joshua, which says, he asked God to hold the sun and the moon in the sky for an extra day so he could kill more people. And God just said, oh yeah, sure, I'll do that. And he did. Or of course my favorite, which was the Tower of Babel, which is supposedly the
earth is flat.
And that's beyond the pole on the other side of the slope from Little Mark. And I think it's quite stunning that there should be an area as big as that unexplored. And that's beyond the pole on the other side of the slope from Little Mark.